Hello, hello, hello. Please find your seats. I can still see a few seats over here, so if you're looking for one, then I think give that a try. Hello and welcome, good evening, and thank you for joining us here at the UnHerd Club. It's safe to say that the last few weeks, Trump watchers have been spoilt for new material, with skirmishes over Greenland, ice violence in Minnesota, an armada lurking somewhere near-ish Iran, and some quite bizarre AI videos of the Obamas, and of course the Epstein files causing massive reverberations all the way into our cozy corner of Westminster here. So love him or loathe him, there is no shortage of evidence that Trump 2.0 is ratcheting up to be quite the sequel to his first term. Members of the Republican Party might have their misgivings about the Donald, but he is their man for better or for worse, whereas the international right-wing movement doesn't have to stand by Don. British and European right-wing activists have used Trumpism as a model of a new kind of muscular politics, a vision of what conservatives could achieve across the world. But is the right wrong for looking for inspiration from Donald Trump? Two formidable teams are going to grapple over this very vexed question tonight. In the proposition, UnHerd regular contributors Eric Kaufmann and Sam Rubinstein. And in the opposition, the Spectator's Lord Toby Young and X's Charles Cornish-Dale. Please welcome them all to the UnHerd Club. If you haven't been to a debate here at UnHerd before, let me explain how it works. We're going to have 3-minute opening statements at this here lectern, followed by 30 minutes of open and I hope fiery debate, and then 30 minutes of audience questions from the likes of all of you lovely people. If you are watching online and you're not in this cozy room here in Westminster, then you will get a 20-minute free preview, at which point you will be cruelly cut off. But if you want to watch the whole event as it happens and join in the questions at the very end, you just have to go to unherd.com/live and become a subscriber. So before we start our opening statements, I'm going to ask all of you in the room to vote. I want you to decide, does this House believe that the right should dump Trump? If you believe the right should dump Trump, please raise your hand now. Okay, that's about 17, and if you believe the right should not dump Trump, put your hands up now.
Good.
That's about 32. Okay, so we've got a clear advantage. A clear advantage there.
Yeah, undecided.
Okay, that's good. We love a bit of undecided here. That means we can sway you on one side or the other. If you are undecided, then I would strongly suggest you listen closely to the arguments tonight and make up your mind by the end of it, because then we can come out with a really nice, clean victory for one side or the other. So, without further ado, please welcome in the first proposition position, Eric Kaufmann.
I'll go up to the lecture.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess I'm here to try to convince you that the right should dump Trump. Obviously, Trump cannot be dumped in the American system. But what I mean is, I don't think Trumpism, the full-throated Trumpism, is really the way forward for the right. Why do I say that? First of all, I think Trump was great in many respects. Populism is important for democracy. And essentially, Trump was the only one of 17 candidates willing to make immigration control central to his primary pitch in 2015. That was great. Elevating the issue of border control, taking on the issue of affirmative action, DEI. I applaud all of that. And his predecessors were far too cowardly to do that. And conservative parties outside of the US have been very cowardly on cultural issues and immigration. So you do need populism, you do need disruption. However, you also have to build back. And you also have to work within institutions, within the rules. And I think this is where Trump falls down. You don't just need hard power, you need soft power as well. You have to make a principled and moral argument if you want to win hearts and minds for the long term. So what I would say, for example, just let's take one example, which is the crusade against Harvard and other universities, which I wholeheartedly support in the sense that these universities were corrupt, no viewpoint diversity, trampling on free speech, all the rest of it. What an opportunity to come in there and actually say, you guys violated the principle of non-discrimination on the basis of race by discriminating against whites and males in admittance. You violated a whole bunch of other principles around free speech. But instead we have one fine on day one, a different deal on day two, totally arbitrary, no principles. The whole moral message gets completely lost and drowned out. So I'm really worried that Trump is a sort of damaging the soft power arguments of the right at a time when a lot of progressives are rethinking some of their ideas after the excesses of BLM and the excesses of Me Too and the excesses of all of these cultural woke campaigns. They're in a position where actually the right could have changed some minds. But when you have somebody in there who is all about, who's arbitrary, corrupt, narcissistic, is not consistent in any way, then he just simply damages that. And actually, I think we're at a moment where we really need to try and change the high culture. I think Trump's purely might makes right approach, I'm afraid, is not going to do it. And I really worry that if he goes out, everything he's done is going to be undone. Not only that, I am Canadian, so I've seen the damage this does to other conservative movements outside the United States. He basically lost the election for the right, and I actually think this is another problem. He's out there threatening and bullying Greenland and Canada and various other places. Again, this is very negative for a right that really needs to zero in on the threats of immigration, threats of the culture war. In order to win this, it's not enough to just control government, because if the left controls the professions, the institutions, they'll just shape-shift. They'll call DEI something else. You're going to be playing whack-a-mole. You can't win just through executive power. So there is why I would say I don't think Trump is the way forward for the right. All right.
Thank you, Eric. Next up, our first opposition is Lord Toby Young.
Very hard to know how much time you have.
Sorry, I ripped up my microphone getting out my speech.
You have to.
Well, just while that's happening, I'll just respond just briefly to Eric's argument. Eric, your argument seemed to be that I like most of Trump's policies, not all but most, but I would prefer it if they were packaged in a more respectable, patrician, old-school Republican guise. And I'm not sure you can have one without the other. I think Trump is a package, and you don't have to embrace the whole of that package, but on balance, it's a good package. So one of the reasons I think not to dump Trump is that he's become a figurehead, as Eric more or less just conceded, a figurehead in the fight against radical progressive ideology across the West. And if you think of this as a Manichaean struggle, and I do, then you have to accept it would be an act of catastrophic self-sabotage to try and disassociate ourselves from our most powerful ally in this fight. And in case you need reminding, I'll list some of the battles, just some of the battles that Trump and his allies in his administration have won in the ongoing struggle against this toxic ideology and its bug-eyed adherents. His Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, shut down USAID, a major source of funding for NGOs promoting woke propaganda across the West. He signed an executive order banning biological men from competing on girls' and women's sports teams. Hard to object to that. He's the first Western leader to stand up to the international climate lobby by withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, dismantling key climate and environmental regulations, many of them put in place by his predecessor, fast-tracking permits for oil, gas and coal exploration, and cutting off funding to various net zero propaganda outfits. He's rolled back, as Eric said, DEI programs across the federal bureaucracy. He's stepped up the control of America's borders, deporting more than 250,000 criminal aliens, which incidentally has seen crime drop quite significantly across the United States during Trump's second term. He's used the bully pulpit of the White House to rail against the progressive capture of institutions, bureaucracies, NGOs, universities, the media, expert bodies. He's defunded the censorship industrial complex and encouraged America's allies across the West, particularly the UK, to stand up for free speech. He's supported Israel in its war with radical Islamist terrorist organizations, and he's taking a robust line with Iran. And perhaps, I think most importantly, he's rejected what we might call progressive etiquette. He doesn't speak in the approved language, doesn't defer to upper middle class taboos. He treats progressive outrage as proof that he's winning. It's this breach, I think, with propriety, this rejection of elite mores, that's why so many conservatives want to dump Trump. Maybe not Sam and Eric, but I think many of them, that's the reason. By openly flouting these mores, he's helped to break their spell. This is the vibe shift that he's responsible for, not just in the US, but across the West. And it feels like the lifting of some vast oppressive cloud. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Trump is perfect. As a classical liberal who believes in free trade, I don't like his economic protectionism, particularly when it harms British businesses. His track record on free speech on the domestic front is, shall we say, mixed. And I'm uncomfortable with his administration's attacks on academic freedom and free speech in universities. Sometimes he or the people working for him cross the line, such as the depiction of the Obamas as chimpanzees in a recent video on Truth Social, as Eric pointed out. I'd prefer it if he unequivocally sided with Zelensky in Ukraine's war with Russia instead of trying to make nice with Putin. I'm not going to stand here and defend all the actions of ICE, although I think he's right to make defending America's borders and deporting illegals a priority. But we're allowed to have these reservations about Trump without wanting to disassociate ourselves from him. When we tot up all the positive things he's done, they outnumber the negative, I think, by a pretty large margin. Don't let the other side persuade you that not dumping Trump means we're saddled with defending every last thing he's said or done. We can be critical friends rather than political enemies. And I also think it would be politically naive to...
30 seconds.
Oh, well, I'm only about... I can have a little bit longer.
No, you can't.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll save that then for a little bit later, and I'll just leave you with this argument, which is, do we really have the luxury of being able to dump Trump at this late hour? He's now like more than a year into his second term, and it would be a bit late in the day to say we're shocked to discover he doesn't always adhere to liberal norms. Wouldn't dumping Trump be a bit like Sir Keir Starmer trying to disassociate himself from Peter Mandelson after his exposure in the latest batch of the Epstein files? People would rightfully ask, I think, what do you know about him now that you didn't know 10, 15 years ago? It would look weak and opportunistic, the kind of thing our political opponents would do, not people who pride themselves on valuing loyalty over ideological purity. And I would caution you to remember that old saying that while the left looks for traitors, the right looks for allies. So let's not dump our most powerful and effective ally. Let's be mindful of Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment, thou shalt not speak ill of your fellow conservatives. Thanks.
Thank you, Toby. Okay, back to the proposition with Sam Rubinstein.
For the last 10 years, I confess that I have, like many, though perhaps not so many in this room, suffered from a horrible affliction called Trump derangement syndrome. This often makes friends of mine, especially on the right, cringe with embarrassment. But the truth is, I really can't bear him. I'm sick of his face, I'm sick of his voice, I'm bored of him. I don't find him entertaining to listen to anymore. He repeats the same lines over and over, usually involving his pettiest personal grievances. Nothing he can say or do anymore can shock or surprise me. So I want now to explain why I think Trump derangement syndrome actually might have quite a lot going for it. If you'd said a few months ago that Trump would threaten to invade Greenland because he'd been snubbed for the Nobel Peace Prize, people would have said that you had a severe case of TDS. If you'd said in the 2020 election campaign that Trump would refuse to accept the result if he lost, that he would ring up the Secretary of State for Georgia, commanding him to find 11,780 votes, exactly the number he needed to flip the state, people would have accused you, if you'd said that, of having TDS. When the director Rob Reiner was horrifically murdered a few months ago, Trump wrote something on Truth Social so deranged that even his most ardent supporters were taken aback. Reiner, he claimed, had been killed because he'd annoyed everyone around him with his Trump derangement syndrome. Well, one of the things Reiner had said about Trump many years ago is that he was unfit for office. What could possibly have better vindicated Reiner's judgments than Trump's remarks? And I do want to take this opportunity also. I don't think Trump is just coarse or vulgar. I think he's a sort of psychologically abnormal man. It's not a case of him being a bit too rough around the edges. This is this is highly sociopathic, I think, and abnormal. There is, I think, a reverse Trump derangement syndrome where Trump supporters present what seems like his obvious unfitness for office as really being part of some grand master plan. I think we saw this in the Greenland business. Let's say that the commander-in-chief was playing four-dimensional chess. He was putting pressure on the Europeans to make us, cough up on our own defense spending. I mean, let's say this is true. Well, alliances were damaged, perhaps irreparably. Mark Carney was thrown into the arms of China. He even received some criticism from his loyal lapdogs in the Republican Party. All this in exchange for what exactly? For military rights on Greenland, which the Americans exercised already. Every time I watch Trump now, I am struck by the scale of his extraordinary personal vanity. He's incapable of uttering a sentence without mentioning that he stopped 8 wars. He's incapable of appraising other political figures, except by the criterion of how loyal and deferential they are to him. I think possibly in the first term he was restrained by the people around him, or possibly his mental state has simply got worse. He wastes what political capital he has, what political capital has been granted to him by winning elections. He wastes this on threatening to withhold federal funding from infrastructure projects because he wants Dulles Airport and Penn Station to be named after him. It does all have the air, I think, of a third world despotism. All this, I think, is bad and wrong on its own terms, and it's a very dangerous combination of traits, I think, in someone who wields as much power as Donald Trump does. But even moving beyond from that, I think it's unpopular and unstrategic. Eric made the point about what happened to Pierre Poilievre in Canada. We don't want right-wing or populist right-wing movements in the rest of the world to be too tethered to Trump, because Trump is unpopular, he's erratic, and he does risk, I think, sinking the ship that bears his name.
30 seconds.
But Trump, I think, is also bad for the American right. They have a pitch that works well: cut tax, defeat woke, secure the border, and it's constantly undermined by Trump's behavior, which is why they risk losing the midterms later this year. It seems often that the price of entry in the American right is utter loyalty to Trump. You have to affirm that the election was stolen, that he stopped 8 wars, that everything should be renamed in his honor. He has reduced the right, I think, to a vehicle for his own vanity. He's made the right less effective, less popular. He has, above all, I think, made the right stupider. So if he must choose between these two strains of Trump derangement syndrome, better, I think, the one that allows us to trust our eyes and ears.
Thank you, Sam. And finally, our last speaker for these initial opening statements, the second opposition, Charles Cornish-Dale.
Well, good evening. If the philosopher G.W.F. Hegel were alive today, what would he call Donald Trump? If not the Weltgeist on horseback, the words he used to describe Napoleon after his victory at the Battle of Jena, how about the Weltgeist on a golf cart? Donald Trump, like Napoleon, is a force of nature, an inevitability, both a product of history and its most powerful agent, a great man, capital G, capital M. Donald Trump has reshaped American and global politics, redefining the limits of the possible and offering the right in America and Europe new avenues for self-assertion and success after decades of impotence, cuckoldry and failure. Long after Trump is gone, and although there is only one Donald Trump, Trumpism will remain. I think the whole framing of this debate is wrong. It isn't a question of should the right dump Donald Trump, but can they? No, obviously not. My expectation tonight is to hear our opponents rehash some familiar arguments about Donald Trump and his suitability to be President of the United States of America. He's a racist, he's a rapist, he's economically illiterate, he's in the Epstein files. He wants to destroy NATO and take Greenland from Denmark. He's too cozy with Vladimir Putin. He hasn't actually done anything. It's all smoke and mirrors and bluff and bluster. He tried to overturn the 2020 election and encourage the events of January 6th, whatever they were, and so on. The contradictions and indeed the validity of these arguments don't really matter. None have worked against Trump. Nothing has worked against Trump, which is why it was necessary to try and lock him up, and then, when that didn't work, to kill him on at least 2 different occasions. These arguments are doubly ineffectual coming from a cosy salon in Europe. The Trump administration doesn't care what European elites think. If the admin is listening to Europeans at all, it's listening to anonymous right-wing bodybuilders with names like Raw Egg Nationalist and Bronze Age Pervert. But that's it. The mainstream media has called Trump an American Caesar, not to mention Orange Hitler and 1,000 other bad things. The Caesar comparison was intended, of course, to impress upon Americans and the world the existential threat Trump poses to American democracy, and perhaps also to encourage some crazy lone wolf to go Brutus mode and to try to blow his head off. But the mainstream media failed to consider the full implications of what they were saying. If Trump is indeed Caesar, what does that make America? Remember, Caesarism didn't die with Caesar. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, avenged the murdered father and brought the Republic to an end. The Julio-Claudian dynasty ruled Rome as emperors for the better part of a century. Trump, barring some Rubicon moment, will be gone in 2029. Trumpism, however, won't surrender its hold on American politics so easily. So here are a few questions for us all to think about. If not Trump, or a man in the Trump mold, then who? Mitt Romney? Mike Pence? If not an imperial presidency, with enhanced executive powers and a healthy disregard for precedent and, indeed, the law, domestic and international, then what? If not America first, then who? Who comes first instead? Donald Trump, as I say, is an inevitability. The European right, who I'm sure we'll talk about as much as the American right this evening, will also have to reckon with Trumpism long after he's gone, and the model for national self-determination he's created. Even Trump's faults, and the ways in which he has harmed Europe, will turn out to be in her best interest, I believe. The question for the European right is not how or whether to dispense with Trump, but how best to apply Trumpian politics to their own unique circumstances. As I said before, it's not a question of should. Should doesn't come into it, only necessity. Can the right do what is needed? We'll see.
Thank you, Charles. Okay. We're going to remove the emotional support lectern and enter into the a more free-for-all part of this debate. I'm going to basically go in reverse, start back with you, Eric, and give you each a chance to respond to some of the things you've heard in those other speeches. But now all bets are off. If you want to interrupt each other, shout at each other, brawl in the aisle, it's up to you. But Eric, I will allow you to begin.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's far too early to pronounce, the sort of Schmittian approach a success, right? So we have this, Machiavelli had this distinction between foxes and lions. The Trump approach being the lion approach, which is simply to use power. And look, I don't doubt that in effect, the predecessors, as I mentioned, on the right, the McCains and also in other countries like Britain, they were too cowardly to use the power. They needed to take on the institutions. They needed to take power away from the quangos and arm's length bodies. So that definitely is necessary. However, there also has to be a legitimating script, a set of principles. The fox approach, as opposed to the lion's approach, as used by the left, is one of cunning and deviousness, where you will inhabit a skin suit that says anti-racism and redefine its meaning to mean being, if you're not racist against whites and Asians, therefore you are a racist. So there is the cunning strategy of working in the shadows, working through the arm's length bodies and institutions, redefining words. what the right desperately, in my view, needs to do is to push back against that stuff culturally and morally as well, to say, look, this is what they've done, this is how they've redefined the term racism, and that's why we're repealing Johnson's executive order of 1965. Repeal the order. So I'm not disagreeing with a lot of the policies. I am disagreeing with the fact the way it's being legitimated is just, we're in power now, we're going to move fast and break things, and that's it. There is also, as Toby mentioned, breaking of principles around, say, academic freedom. It's fine to go to Europe and lecture, quite rightly in my view, the Europeans about violations of free speech, but if you then start to use the justification of anti-Semitism to crack down on any expression of criticism of Israel or pro-Palestine sentiment, again, I just think you're just undermining any kind of principled case. So my worry is Trump leaves office, if a Democrat comes in, all the executive orders are repealed, we're more or less, we're already seeing in Virginia the kind of politics that's likely to occur in the aftermath of a Democratic victory. So I think you've got to build structures, and you have to respect, yes, you can challenge the way the left has corrupted the elite norms, which they have done. They've insinuated themselves into elite norms, corrupted them towards DEI. You have to sort of go in, preserve the norms, preserve that suit, change the meaning back to the way it was before. I think that kind of patient work is necessary, because if the other side controls all the institutions and all the elites in the professional class, you can do your executive orders. You're not going to be able to actually change things very much.
Toby, how can a classical liberal like you defend this complete upending of the norms? If you're seeing my face right now, then I'm afraid it's the end of your 15-minute free preview of this live emergency debate, should the right dump Trump. If you want to know who wins this debate between Toby Young and Charles Cornish-Dale and Eric Kaufmann and Sam Rubinstein, then you've got to become a subscriber. You can pick up exactly where you left off. Just go to unherd.com/live now. What are you still waiting for? If you're still oohing and ahhing over whether or not to become a subscriber, then let me tell you this. Not only will you be able to pick up where you left off on this emergency live debate, should the right dump Trump, and find out which team is our winner, but you'll also get everything else UnHerd has to offer. Long-form journalism, video interviews, documentaries, podcasts, you name it, we've got it. Go to unherd.com/live and join our little free-thinking family now.